not actually the Kentucky Fried Chicken or the Krispy Kreme donut that is the problem. It's our relationship with these foods.
How to deal with emotional eating.
Processed foods can work on your brain like a drug.
What's the cause of this?
You may always feel these cravings, but I promise you that the voice does die down.
A simple plant-based diet can reverse chronic illness.
That's crazy.
The weakest motivation is weight loss.
There's more to health than just what we eat.
We have a fantastic episode today with Dr. Anthony Lim. He has been the medical director of the McDougall program for 10 years, where he's helped countless people overcome chronic illnesses using lifestyle medicine on a plant-based diet. He has really focused on one of the most challenging areas, which is emotional eating, and he's become an expert at that using his mindfulness-based approach. And I'm so excited to get into the details of this man's wisdom. So with that said, welcome to the show, Dr. Anthony Lim.
Hi, Joe. Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation.
So my first question is, you're the medical director of the McDougall program, and you've been pioneering this lifestyle approach to healing and incorporating food into someone's recovery of whatever it might be. How did that come about from being med school and becoming a doctor and then finding yourself in this pioneering area?
It's a great question. I think most doctors enter into the medical profession with the desire to heal. And my 4 years of med school and 3 years of residency, great training at Boston University School of Medicine and Santa Rosa Family Medicine residency. The paradigm that I saw the care of my patients, it sort of was focused more on management of chronic illness than true actual healing and reversal of chronic illnesses like diabetes and high blood pressure. So whether it was through pills or whether it was through procedures or referrals to surgeries, usually the focus was on improving numbers and helping patients to manage their condition. And although that's better than having unmanaged chronic illnesses, it's still a far cry from healing. So it wasn't until after residency that I was watching PBS and saw Dr. Joel Fuhrman come on screen, and he made these outrageous claims about the power of a whole food plant-based diet, which I had never heard of, despite 7 years of medical training. The power of a whole food plant-based diet to reverse all these chronic illnesses that I had been managing up until that point. That when I heard that, wow, that got my attention. And it sounded too good to be true, but when you're looking at pictures of beans and broccoli and all these beautiful colors of the various fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains, there's something very appealing about it. And it piqued my curiosity. I read his book, Eat to Live. I went to the annual Plantrition Conference. This was 2014, summer of 2014. That's where I first saw Dr. John McDougall speak and learned that he was here in Santa Rosa and started following him, learning more about his work. I haven't looked back since. That outrageous claim, I now realize, is very much a truth, that patients can, if they're willing to get to the root cause of their illness, oftentimes food being a huge part of that, they can absolutely transform their health. Because I'm now almost a full decade in as medical director of the McDougall program, and my passion and enthusiasm for what I would call lifestyle medicine, right? Because it's more than just it. Food is as important as it is one piece, one very important piece, but there's so many other pieces. So I would encompass that all under lifestyle medicine. My passion and enthusiasm for this is greater than ever. I am more fired up about the work that I do 10 years later than when I first began, and I was pretty excited back then.
That's amazing. The image that came to mind when you was describing the management versus the lifestyle was having a boat with holes in it that you're trying to keep afloat with sellotape versus having a boat that you actually fix the hull.
Yeah.
And one of those is exhausting and the other one's a passion.
Yes.
You
Yes.
get it. Like some might not work out, but a lot of them, they go off and they float, and that's it. You're call me when you need another chat type.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great analogy. The other, this is not my story, but it's a story that's always stuck with me is that story of, you know, it's like imagine a fishing village by the side of a fast flowing river, and you're there and you see this person drowning, and you go in, swim in, get him or her back to shore and do, you know, CPR, finally get them back to health, only to see another person drowning in the river. You jump in, fish another person out, and then you just keep doing this. And then finally you realize, like, wait a second, what's going on upstream? And then you realize you can you know, maybe there's someone pushing people in upstream. Maybe there was what's supposed to be a banister to protect people that is broken, so people are leaning and falling. And whatever it is, there's something upstream in the river that is causing all these drowning people. So we could either keep jumping into the river and saving drowning people and feel like a hero, or we can walk upstream and either fix the banister or put the person who's pushing people in prison with rehab and actually deal with the root problem. Yeah, that story's always stuck with me because it's pretty visceral.
That is such a great story. That is like the perfect metaphor, because it reminds me of the moment that you had when you're looking at being a medical practitioner and you're suddenly like, wait, what's going on? What's the cause of this?
Right. Absolutely. And, you know, Joe, I've been wired this way since I was young, honestly, which is, I mean, friends who know me, they always know that Anthony's continually seeking to improve himself and, you know, be his best self, get better, make things around him better. So I'm just wired that way to think like, okay, what's really going on, really truly going on, and how do we start to take steps to address that?
It's interesting because that is a quality that allows people to find what are near truths. I mean, we can't really argue there's absolute truth. There is in some situations, but with medical, there is a near truth that absolutely plant-based diets will improve many of these conditions. And if you're open like you and you're seeking, you're most likely going to arrive at that. Like it's just waiting there. Something interesting you said was you've been the medical director of the McDougall program for nearly a decade, but you only went to that conference a decade ago. So how did you?
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Right. I know. That's what we, whatever you want to call it, serendipity, fate. I feel so incredibly blessed. I mean, what happened is it was summer of 2014 that I saw that, you know, Joel Fuhrman come on PBS. And then I was working at Kaiser, largest managed care organization in the United States. I was working at Kaiser in Santa Rosa, doing primarily sort of more like urgent care, triage type work. After that conference, there was a cardiologist named Sandy Warren who had started a plant-based eating class years prior to that when he had his epiphany. and he started going, when he would do consultations in the emergency room, he would, stabilize them, but he would also give them like a copy of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Basically say, here, all right, do this when you leave here. And meanwhile, he started this monthly plant-based eating class. Well, he retired right around the time, just a few months before I had my own moment or epiphany. And so there was just a natural transition. I started leading that class at Santa Rosa we sometimes had as many as 80, 100 people, Kaiser patients in one room. And I would give lectures or bring in guest speakers. And fast forward, so I'd been doing this for almost a year. And lo and behold, my mom forwards me an email at the McDougall program and True North Health Center, which are both located in Santa Rosa. Dr. Alan Goldhammer, Dr. John McDougall, their friends and colleagues, were advertising for a joint staff physician position together. And I thought that sounded too good to be true. The second thing I thought is there's no way I stand a chance. I'm this wet behind the ears plant-based physician who's only got, maybe a year under his belt. But I applied, I interviewed with Dr. Goldhammer, Dr. McDougall that same weekend. Next thing I know, I'm the newest staff physician on the block at True North and McDougall.
So that brings me on to my next question, actually. So 10 years in the lifestyle, the hub of lifestyle medicine in the US, I would say. What are the common traits, habits, and mindset of the people that really do well on this program?
That's the $1 million question. I think one is resilience, certainly, because although there are periods where things all seem to be going your way, there are periods when things get really tough. When, let's say, you're trying to lose weight, where your weight plateaus, or holidays, right? Or taking a trip and vacations, and you might have a setback. And in the face of setback, you see what people are really made of, right? And some people can kind of get really discouraged in the face of setback and revert back to their old patterns. And some people can sort of dig really deep, and even if they've had a momentary setback, get back on track. So that quality of resilience is huge, right? And that's why I always kind of try to get my patients to focus on the long-term picture. Certainly celebrate the short-term wins, but really think about the long-term picture and how to. I believe you can build and develop that quality of character that can build resilience, but you need to be paying attention to that. Two is just this consistency. It's just this day in, day out consistency and a focus on habits and behaviors, versus getting too fixated on the outcome, right? I mean, I know the tendency is for patients to want to know how much weight they can lose and how many meds will they be able to get off. And I think that's natural, right? We all want, we want to have that outcome that we can celebrate. But if I can help patients to focus on just what do they commit to in terms of healthy behaviors, that even if they can't see the result from one day to the next, they just know they're on the right track. That sort of day in, day out consistency is critical. And a book that I really like and very popular is Atomic Habits. Resilience, consistency. The third is basically support. It's really hard, really hard to do this independently on your own. No family support, no friend support. So if you can be in some form of community that offers a structure, support when you're having a difficult time, encouragement, some measure of accountability, that's gold. Oh, one last one I should mention. These days, we're bombarded by information from so many sources. So I actually find that one really difficult thing is for people to find sources that they trust. That they trust and truly are leading them on the right track, in the right direction. I'm not going to name, but I see some of these health experts and their huge followings and what they're recommending or suggesting, and I cringe, to be honest, because I just think of all the people who are really trying to change their health around, and in a way, they're given half-truths. There's something about the expert or the person that resonates and is true, but there's a lot that doesn't. And that can be dangerous, right? Because then you're doing some things right, but then you're spending a lot of time doing things that can actually be counterproductive. So I find that if people can find those, it's not a lot, but just a few places where they can get trustworthy, reliable, good knowledge and information, that's an incredible blessing. And that's why I love being part of the McDougall program, right? Because I do believe that, we are a program that offers really good, trustworthy, reliable information.
It's really interesting what you've described there, because I know that you are a practitioner of mindfulness, but in the teachings of that, there's the three jewels, and it's like the teaching, the community, and the practice, which is what you're describing here. Right?
Yes, yes,
it's very similar. That age-old combination that creates success. And one of the things that I was thinking when you were sharing was, is the healing process a large part actually learning these skills, like learning resilience, learning consistency, learning to take support? Because I think that a lot of people that fall into the most disordered eating, which is emotionally led, that they've probably had some kind of experiences that's led to a lack of consistency, low resilience, and also no community.
You're absolutely right. It is learning, but I think the word that comes to mind immediately is it's practicing. If there's one thing I've come to appreciate, is that these qualities of being, it's not a one and done. It's a lifelong practice. I mean, just think of something like patience, right? You don't go from impatient to patient after reading a good book on it, right? The good book on patience may inspire you, may help you to see, there are a lot of ways that maybe I haven't acknowledged that in my life I am being impatient. And it may give you this hope after reading about certain ideas and certain individuals who have embodied patience in their life, that, maybe something more is possible. And then it may give you a menu of ideas for how to get started on that. Now, that in a way was the easy part. That realization and that desire. The hard part is now the day in, day out practice of it. It's actually almost catching yourself when you're being impatient and course correcting and redirecting. And it's all, the analogy I give my patients is that it is like a flabby muscle. You can't visualize it. I mean, doesn't anatomically exist anywhere, but your patience muscle is flabby. And so what we're doing is, with each rep that you do where you are tempted to be impatient and you lean into what does patience look like, you are flexing it. And over time, that muscle is going to become stronger and stronger, where the default behavior is now like you just are patient. It's not even like you're trying to be patient. That's just how you be. It didn't happen overnight. It really took an intentional commitment and the daily practice of it.
That is so fascinating. Just as a little side note, when I moved to Thailand, they've got very long traffic lights here, like 5-7 minutes, like they're really, really long. And I would be sitting, coming from London, with that energy of like, this is torture. And I looked around and I noticed that, at least in Chiang Mai, the Thais were patient. And as I started paying attention, I realized it's beyond patience. They're not waiting. Waiting is a mindset of, I need to be there. Why aren't I there? And I looked at them and I thought, they don't even wait. They're just being. It was such an eye-opening moment. But anyway, I see the point. It's so fascinating, the information that you're sharing here, because I obviously had a long history with food addiction, and I still definitely have tendencies. And I had the teaching. I knew what I needed to do. I had the resilience, but I didn't have the community. I grew up in an environment which wasn't very community fostering. And when I started doing this, I chose my community to be a YouTube community, which was the worst choice that you can make, because it's so fickle and it's not even real. But my lack, I didn't realize at the time, but my inexperience of creating community led me to use my YouTube channel as support. And then you're now at the whim of the community, and it didn't go very well. So what do you, in your experience, what makes I have a much better support system now, but in your experience, maybe at the McDougall program or generally, what creates a good community to go through this process, this transition?
Gosh, you're asking such good questions, Joe. Really. But paramount is unconditional love. Just this, like, because that's what leads to a feeling of safety and trust. And in the absence of that, your hope of a truly authentic community is, it's jeopardized significantly, right? And by the way, this is all a spectrum, right? So I have never, one could say I've never truly been a part of a 100% unconditionally loving community, because I don't even know that fully, exists. But if you, to the extent that you say it's a spectrum, we see a lot of communities where you say the wrong thing, you're out. You do the wrong thing, goodbye, right? And so you kind of constantly feel like you're walking on eggshells. You only put forth the mask or front that will be accepted by the group, while all your deviant behaviors you keep behind closed doors. So you're, so that's to me, that's what I'm seeing a lot of going on. But the more that we can move towards people vulnerably sharing and then being met with just support and love and encouragement, that is first and foremost to me the most important thing. And then related to that is this atmosphere of true listening and sharing, non-judgment, all of these, as you can see unconditional love is the root. And then you have the listening and sharing, non-judgment, encouragement, and willingness to say things that sometimes may not be very popular,
It's so amazing what you're saying.
But the only thing that allows you to say something that's not popular is because if you trust that it's coming from a place of love, not judgment, right? If I'm saying, hey, Joe, I'm concerned about this behavior I'm seeing in you. If we're not plugged into a community of unconditional love, you're going to view that as like, whoa, who's he to say this or that? But when you trust that, oh, this isn't an ego thing. This is just that I'm coming from a place of love and care. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm bringing it up, then it's received differently.
That's really key, because in my experience and in my study of this is that this emotional eating mechanism, it's seeking connection with something. And a lot of people who have that, they've never been able to find real deep connection in some areas. And that's why having this community that you can go to is a game changer. And I have some of that connection now, but I was just laughing as you were saying it, because when I was on YouTube, it was like, because it's so like now I understand it, but this was 10 years ago. You think it's a real community, but it's actually not. And it has the spitefulness and flimsiness of like groupthink. So it's actually a really dangerous place.
Yes.
And the more vulnerable you are, at first it's welcome, but then it turns against you. All that vulnerability becomes ammunition. And I started, my eating went better first, and then it started to go worse as I was feeling more and more disconnected from this space. So I love what you said there. It's like, find a community that is on the spectrum of unconditional love, where you can be supported, you can say what's going on, because that's what it is. It's like when you're in those emotional states, you've got two choices. Either I go to my reliable, consistent, always available food, or I go to what might be perceived as an inconsistent, unreliable contact source. And the more reliable that becomes, like the McDougall program, the more that becomes something you can rely on, the more you're going to choose that, I guess.
2 or 3 thoughts. First, just to relate back to your YouTube. So the kind of work I'll do with patients is that they may look back on their YouTube and say, oh, what you did, and be like, oh, that was so dumb. What a bad decision. And what I will try and work with them is like, well, let's flip the script. You learned a lot from that, right? So you, at the moment that you chose YouTube community, you might be like, oh, what an idiot I'm not saying you are, but I'm just saying it's easy, right? This is what I see with patients. They criticize themselves. Oh, what an idiot I was. How could I be so naive? I'll flip it and be like, hey, you took a huge step of courage. You're someone who has stayed away from community, and maybe it wasn't the best community, but you made a step in favor of community. online as it was. And from that, you learned about both the benefits and the dangers of online community. And now so rather than just say, forget community, it's like, okay, that I saw some good, now I want healthier community. So it's this, we're framing your journey in the context of continual growth.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus like, I got that one wrong. You know what I'm saying? Which is what I see all. So that was just an aside, but I couldn't help resist because that's what I do with my patients. Whatever they're giving me and telling me, I'm listening, and then trying to help reframe things to bring about a certain kind of perspective that I want them to be sort of like swimming in. Yeah.
No, I totally see that. That's very, very, it's very, very powerful. And in my own experience, I'm just very fortunate in that I have a very broad perspective on this, and that you can't get to where you want to be without going through what you need to go through. You can't choose the stepping stones. Whatever decision you make, that was right then. And also with the communities itself, it's like there's no one to blame there for that either. It's just, everyone was going through a period of time where that's what they were all doing online, and everyone learned lessons from it in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, our McDougall program is 100% virtual at this point. I mean, the format can make it a little more challenging, but I think if you go into it with the appropriate sort of parameters and objectives, and then you sort of consistently model that and enforce it, I think you can really get some rich interactions. The second aside that I was going to say is that even with what you described as two choices, you either go to the sort of what I would call like the default unhealthy choice, right? Most people at midnight when they're stressed out are not reaching for carrots and celery, right? They're reaching for French fries or going out to fast food. So you sort of presented that versus the one that you're trying to kind of move into, let's call it a baked potato or, a bowl of oatmeal, whatever it may be. So again, that's sort of the classical, is that people kind of see it as this or this. I'm actually starting to move more towards this idea that there's always a spectrum. Like there are some things that are black and white, but I'm really finding more and more in life that most things there's shades of gray, right? So I think it's entirely possible that, and I've done this, and there's some rich dessert that there's a part of me that really wants, but at the same time, I just know in the past that when I've eaten as much as I normally would, I don't feel good after. So, way I can have my cake and eat it too, but I might have like 3 bites and really just really savor the experience of those 3 bites of whatever it may be. I mean, it's as recent as yesterday. My daughter and son made a batch of chocolate chip cookies. Now, these chocolate chip cookies are not what I would recommend to my patients to eat on a daily basis. I had probably 3 bites and oh my gosh, they were so good. Now, this was after I had finished my healthy tofu banh mi dinner that my wife made and had my fruit for dessert. And this was like the cherry on top, like this probably, 3 bites of this fresh out of the oven chocolate chip cookie. I have no regrets about that. I absolutely savored that experience. And so I only say that because I think a lot of times my patients experience this forced dichotomy, this either this or this. And my point is, who says? There's only one person who says, and that's you. So you get to say, and as long as you're acting from a place of what you say and you're being thoughtful and mindful and reflective about it, then no matter how it goes, it's actually good news. If you think you could only take 3 bites and you end up having an entire dozen, I'm going to be like, hallelujah. That's a moment to remember. Let's savor that, learn from it. And what I'm curious is what you're going to take away from that next time.
But that's quite an advanced skill, I would say. I remember when I first, I was at somewhere, a party or something, and they brought around this cheesecake, and I was sitting next to someone, and this was delicious. And they brought it around, and the person next to me, it was a young woman. She said, "No, thank you, I'm full." And it's like she did a backflip,
right?
And I actually asked, I said, "How do you do that? Like, what What do you check? Because I'm always really curious. And she just explained it because it's completely normal. She goes, I felt, and I was like, I'm just not hungry. And it doesn't matter what that is. I'm not hungry. And I'm like, wow, like you can have that much connection with your body. But it's really great that you're opening people to the idea that they can actually do, because it's empowering.
I think you bring up a very good and fair point, which is the intervention needs to match where the person is at.
So how much of this do you think is about adopting a plant-based diet? How much of this process, how much does it make it easier? In my own experience, I just found that I went plant-based initially because I was causing so much damage to my body with disordered eating and eating junk food. I had this epiphany. I said, at least if I eat plant food, I'm going to buy more time. And that's what I did. And everything improved about 30%. But I was still unwell, but I'd made a big shift. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what we eat and put into our bodies has a profound impact on not just our physical health, but our mental and emotional well-being. And vice versa, as we start to feel better and think better, then we also make healthier choices about what we put into our body. It's this virtuous cycle, right? It's sort of, the more and more I look at these things, it's the interconnectedness of everything. How you do one thing in some ways is how you do everything, right? Certainly it's not unusual that as people start to eat more fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, and cut out the processed foods and the huge amount of animal products and oil and eating out that they had been doing, and rich sugary desserts and all that, that they just start to feel more balanced, feel more centered. But what I've also been humbled by is it's not enough in and of itself. That I have seen plenty of highly anxious, neurotic, obsessive plant-based eaters that are not centered. And that was part of my own learning process. I will admit that when I first, in 2014, I'm kind of like, plants, like that's everything. Like if everyone eats a plant-based diet, like, you know, everything is solved. And I saw enough very dysfunctional plant-based eaters who had the perfect numbers, the best numbers to speak of, like what everyone want, no chronic medical illnesses, who were just not happy, centered individuals.
100%.
And that was like a very much a wake-up call for me, and realizing, okay, like there's more to health than just what we eat, as important as that is. And that's what's led me to kind of really describe my approach to health from a much more holistic, lifestyle-oriented, inner and outer journey. Not just what we do, but how we be, how we think, how we respond to the uncomfortable feelings and emotions that arise, how we treat other people, how we talk about other people, how we love each other, what resentments we continue to hold in our life towards certain loved ones. I mean, it is one of the most common things I see in my patients is they have some deep relationship that there is some harbored resentment. You don't think that causes some havoc in the body when that's just being, I think of it as like this festering sore that you can't see, but there's just this place of that you're harboring. And you can see it because anytime you get close to it, you see something come out. They're like, ah. And you can almost witness their blood pressure rising, their heart rate increasing, their blood sugar levels increasing, and you're like, oh my gosh, we're not even talking about food right now. We're just talking about their mom or their brother or this friend or this whatever it may be. So that's what it says, that plants has now led to really a greater invitation to just all of life.
And that all of life includes compassion towards the self. And I think this is something which you've spoken about in your presentation on disordered eating or emotional eating. And I had the same experience where I drew this loop, and mine was like, you eat binge food, you feel bad, you beat yourself up, So that triggers you and you eat more food.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to think, where can I break this loop? And what's interesting is we arrived at the same point, and I was like, I can stop beating myself up. That's the one thing I can control. I can't control the urge. I can't control the action. I do feel unwell afterwards, but I can stop telling myself I'm bad. And that is what started to unpin the emotional eating for me. What are your thoughts on that?
This idea of like, you know, this circle, this cycle, this vicious cycle we find ourselves in, this thought like, I can intervene at the point in terms of how I talk to myself after, like whether I beat up myself and all that, I think is significant, and I agree. But I would expand on that. I actually believe that at every stage, you can actually intervene in some way, fit, shape, or manner. And here's how. Okay, here's how. So let's say that you've had an episode of emotional eating. Then certainly at the stage of, oh my gosh, what do I do with that? Do I beat up on myself, experience deeper shame, or do I reflect on it and understand and sort of see what I can do differently next time, right? I think most people can agree that that second course would be the healthier course to take. But then with that, you can think about it like, let's pretend in that reflection, you sort of say, what was the trigger? What was the trigger to me feeling emotional? Oh, the trigger was work. The trigger was working my 12-hour day and not feeling appreciated. Did not realize that work was having that effect, quite such an effect on me. So maybe one place of intervention is now really thinking more seriously about your relationship with work. Do you want to spend 12 hours a day there? Do you want to be in a setting where you feel underappreciated and that at the end of the day, you just feel exhausted and hangry, or do you want to kind of work on that? Okay, that's trigger. Then the trigger leads to certain ways of emotions, right? But those emotions, if we're really looking at carefully, were preceded by something. Do you know what they were preceded by? What do you think they were preceded by?
Thoughts.
Thoughts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were preceded by thoughts. And we live in our own narrative where we assume those thoughts are true. But here's the crazy part. They're not. It's just one narrative. There are many alternate narratives that are not based in fairyland.
Right.
They in my opinion, they are based on truth. It's just looking beyond what you typically see, right? So let's pretend the thought is, oh my gosh, I suck at my job, or I'm stuck in this dead end thing, and this is never going to get better. Who wouldn't feel depressed and sort of anxious, right? But let's say you start going to therapy, and with the belief that I believe that I can change my thought patterns around, and then the therapist helps you to appreciate, like, this job, tough as it is what allowed me to send my kids to college, good colleges, and what's allowed me to put a roof. And yes, there are some drawbacks, but at any point I have a choice. Maybe it doesn't feel like I have a choice, but the fact is I do have a choice. I could go elsewhere. You just start to see it differently. And so then now, even after a long day's work, and I've seen this happen with close people I know, where through that process, they're going to the same work, the same job, and yet they're ending the day with this completely different disposition. So they have actually, through this intentional process, changed their experience and even the emotions that arise for them in that. And let's take it a level further. Let's say, okay, despite all that, you still feel all the emotions. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I feel worthless. Oh, yeah, I'm stuck in it, right? You still have a choice in that moment. You can almost forecast ahead and say, okay, I know that despite my work, these moments are going to continue to arise. What can I choose to respond to that will not involve emotional eating of unhealthy foods, right? And maybe it just starts with brainstorming. Well, and usually this is what I'll do with my patients, right? I'll say, okay, Joe, tell me, let's just do it right now. Joe, tell me 3 things that do not involve eating that tend to bring you a sense of joy and peace and fulfillment. 3 things.
Easy. So playing my guitar, cycling, and meditating.
Beautiful. 3 up, right? I mean, perfect student. So I say, okay, well then, why don't we consider this, Joe? Then we know that despite all this work we're doing, there's still going to be times that you are not able to get your thoughts aligned, and you have a rough day at work, or you get into an argument with your loved one and you feel hijacked. Can you commit to at least do your best when you experience that rather than automatically go to the fridge and get the whatever the unhealthy food is or the cookies from the cookie jar, that you set your timer for 15 minutes and you get to choose from one of those 3 things? I'm either going to practice my guitar for 15 minutes, I'm either going to go in my meditation room and meditate for 15 minutes, or I'm going to hop on my bike and go for a 15-minute bike ride. And if at the end of those 15 minutes you're enjoying yourself and you want to just keep going with it, that's your choice. But all you're committing to is 15 minutes. And then, hey, when I see you next month, let's see how this practice served you, and make sure that you go into this with a sense of curiosity. In other words, if you try this practice and then you still end up putting your hand in the cookie jar, awesome. That's, you know what I mean? Like, that's a win, because to win this game that we're playing, you just have to do the practice. We're not focused on the outcome. We're just doing the practice. And guess what? We're going to keep iterating. So what you're seeing is that there is this sense that at any stage of that vicious cycle, and this is so important for our hope, you can intervene. That is the one thing that cannot be taken away from you.
That is such an amazing support, because from within inside the circle, people can't see where to intervene. But right, because you're outside the circle, you can intervene. And also it's really important to have someone like you to be able to point these things out. That idea you just came up with, I had the timer idea, like just wait 10 minutes, but you've combined it with something that you love to do. That is another level. Like, I've sat there with a timer going,
hey, Joe, trust me, so have I. Okay. I mean, you and I think we share much more in common.
Yeah. And then, but
we can laugh about it, right?
Yeah, it's funny, right? But you're like, bro, don't sit there like that. Play your guitar for 10 minutes. that like completely amplifies the power of that pause.
Oh, absolutely.
That's amazing. Because I know what you're talking about here. And it's like, emotional eating is also, it's a form of anxiety management as well. So you're always like, you're at your computer, you go to the fridge, you're doing this, and just having that practice that you've described, it starts to train you to do something else to manage these situations. I've got one question for you though. So I've done a lot of emotional work myself, and I've gone back through this process. And because I found with food addiction, there's superficial levels like culture, taste, habit, or social. Then there's like more biochemical things going on where you feel a pull for dopamine or self-medication. Then there's the emotional connection seeking, and the further down you go, the further back you go, as you say, the more deeper these addictions are embedded. As you unpin them, what happens is that you might have been doing that activity for a decade, and now you've unpinned at the source. But now you're facing with a habit. I describe it like you break your arm in a plaster cast, you heal your arm, but you've still got this plaster holding this habit in place. How do you get people, or do you ever face people in situations where they've done a lot of emotional work, but they're still dealing with this repetitive habit urge?
Absolutely. Well, I have a number of friends who have struggled with alcohol, and it could be 30 years later, and they'll still say sometimes they get the craving. And so I mean, let's bring it really personal. In my own life, I struggle with both anxiety and depression. This is a very real part of who I am in my past and my present. And as far as I've come in my journey with both of those twin challenges, I have come to accept that they may always be a part of my existence. And that I could either spend all my energy resisting and trying to fix myself of my anxiety or depression, or I can learn to accept that it may and likely will always be a part of me, but come into a new and healthier relationship with it, where my anxiety and depression do not own me. They are not the boss, but rather we're in this dance, right? And I'm leading. I'm saying what I'm creating and what I'm moving into. It's like, oh, I see you, anxiety. Let's pretend I'm scared to get on this interview with you. Like, I see you, anxiety. I see that you don't want to do this interview with Joe because you're scared, but we're doing this because it's important. Okay. So we're going to be okay. It's almost like talking to like your 3-year-old child. Like, I hear you. Yeah. You don't just say, stop it. But you've seen how well that works in the grocery store when the 3-year-old's having a, tantrum. So that's what it is. And so with my patients, I try to encourage them like, hey, you may always feel these cravings and these urges, but with time and with practice, I promise you that the voice does die down in general. And every now and then, given the right situation and the right circle, it may get really loud. Welcome it. This is the radical part. Welcome it, and understand that that's just continuing to fortify you as long as you can sort of stick with it and not get too discouraged. Right? You have to hold on to hope and belief in this as a journey, and not this sort of like, oh, I fixed that issue. It's done. It's gone.
Right. So sometimes this is quite funny because it's about developing a relationship with that part of you, like you're bringing it along for the ride rather than fighting it. And I had the experience recently. I sometimes sing like kirtans with some friends around Chiang Mai, and there's one from Sanskrit. It's called Aham Brahmasmi, and it means I am, and it's really, really beautiful. My food brain started singing Aham Brahmasmi as Yum Basmati. I was like, come on.
Yes.
And that relationship makes it more friendly, but I'm like, it literally started singing food.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I will say this whole thing is very humbling. You just appreciate how strong these bodily cravings are, right? They are deep, and they've been going on often in many patients' cases decades. I mean, I see patients in their 70s and 80s who are still dealing with disordered eating patterns that they've had since they were a kid. So that to me, the word that comes to mind is humility. That's just humbling.
So you said something really powerful then that I think that the whole world doesn't understand. The illusion is that most people recover. Like, that's why you get criticized if you don't do well. But the reality is most people never recover, right? I'm not talking about the people that show up, they recover, but all the people that don't even try. I had a very compassionate moment recently with my mother, who still has binge eating going on, and she's 82. And I realized most people probably just do that. They carry on struggling with it for their whole lives. And the standouts are the ones that say, I want to go on the McDougall program, or I want to change this in my life. And I think the reality, that's when I look at the statistics, it says 95% of people put all the weight back on. I'm like, how's that possible? It's because you just don't see the people, the people that don't do it, don't make videos about not being able to do it.
Right, right. Yeah, I agree with you to a certain extent in that I feel that most of the world around is what I would call blind or not seeing. And not in the sense that, oh my gosh, their eating is disordered or they're dealing with all these chronic medical issues, because to me, those are the symptoms. That those, like the diabetes, the heart disease, the high blood pressure, that's not the problem. That's actually just the manifestation or the symptom of some relationship with eating or exercise or sleep that has its upstream things that, you know, they're not dealing with. And so I think that most people are not seeing, or blind in the sense that they're not seeing what these upstream factors are. And so they're not dealing with them.
Right. That's it.
Right.
Yes.
But you know, my sincere hope is to get most people very curious about their own life and seeing their blind spots, seeing those things in themselves and in their relationships and in their world around them that they were unable to see before.
Amazing.
And then as they start to grow in that awareness and see that, having the hope and the support and the community and the belief that they have agency in doing something about it. And then last, taking away this sort of ego-centered control mindset where it's, I fix it and make it from this to this. So I would even kind of disagree. I wouldn't necessarily buy into I'm recovered as much as they're on the path to recovery. They're recovering, right? You know, in a way we're all on this journey, and it's not like, I always joke to my patients, it's not like there will ever be the day that I will have arrived at the outcome. We're not going to get on an interview, Joe, and I'll be like, Joe, I'm done. I have finished. The race is complete. There is nothing left in my thoughts or my words or my actions left for me to work on. I am enlightened, and so come and receive. Right? That's crazy. I will never, to the best of my knowledge, I will never be on here saying that. And so that in itself is comforting, because that makes you just realize, like, oh, then really what this is about, it's the journey. It's just this journey to continue with each passing day, to make progress, to mature, to grow closer to, whatever you want to call it, your highest self. And that is it. Yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. I spoke to a Rinpoche once, a Tibetan Rinpoche, and he was asked, are you enlightened or something like that? And he said, ask me when I'm dead, because I haven't faced that, so I don't know. Right. I thought that's a great answer.
Yeah.
To your point, so in this process, I've been looking at, like, how you started, how you start with patients, then this area in between where they grow their strength, community, and emotional process. But then you get the people who are succeeding, and I'm in that camp now. But I noticed a new thing, because it's never ending. Now I'm dealing with mild overeating. So I'd never break my rules very much. I break them a little bit, but just enough to retard progress. And I find this is a harder thing to work with, because when it was extreme, like fast food, I had the motivation to stop it. But now it's an extra bar of tempeh, or it's a little bit of oily sauce with some sugar in it from the local street food. It's lots of minor things. And my brain goes, it's all right. It's all right. And I'm also resting on my laurels that I've already lost 70 pounds. So I'm trying to tell myself, where I am now is someone else's starting point. How do I proceed? But I would love to hear your opinion on, how do you work with people who they're getting their success, but they've plateaued at a reasonably okay level, but they've plateaued and they don't have what it takes to move through that. What do you say to them?
Well, first is, I'm not going to presume that fine-tuning your diet is actually what you need to be doing. Okay. So I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to try, like, if we had the time, you and I would go, hey, we'd probably go for a walk in the woods, go on a hike. So we're doing something healthy. And I just kind of say, like, Joe, let's just go into this conversation with no preconceived ideas of what you should be doing. Just talk to me about your life. Like, Give me a sense of your family, your friends, your work, your relationship with food, where you've gone, where you're at, where you're headed, what's important to you, what do you struggle with? Like just a huge overview. And that's what I do in the McDougall program, right? I have this questionnaire that's like 75 questions that relates to their family, their marriage, their finances, their relationship to food, their movement, smoking, alcohol, drug use, sleep, stress management, purpose, significance, spirituality, right? You name it. I mean, we cover everything, and it's this questionnaire. And then I've got time with them in this one-on-one to sort of, dive into certain things. So I get a bird's eye view. And usually from that bird's eye view, that will help me, at least from my outsider perspective, to know where you fine-tuning your food fits into it. And what I may say is like, Joe, it might be worth considering whether that's really the most important thing for you to be working on at this time in your life, right? And that's all. It's just kind of posing that question. So that can go a few different directions. One is you realize like, I may be okay now if I can just maintain where I'm at, give myself a little bit of a break for the extra piece of tempeh, and like no longer put energy into beating myself up on that, because I've realized this is actually not what's the most important thing to me. That actually, what I'm actually experiencing distress about right now is that I don't know what I want to be doing 5 years from now. And that's actually after our conversation, a bigger rock that I need to be thinking about. So I'm reallocating that mental energy that's like, oh, why can't I break through this plateau? Oh, I need to like that extra piece of, and I'm putting it where I'm actually really truly at when I get away from what I should be doing, or what my health coach is saying, or what the YouTube vegan community is like blasting in my ears, like no oil ever, or whatever it may be, like, and getting me fixated on that as the holy grail. The other direction it can go in is that out of all of that conversation, it really truly is that your top priority is continuing to improve the quality, and that extra tempeh and extra sauce, it may seem small, but it is the big deal to you. And then but see how that's a different issue. Now we work in the behavioral strategies around that. And, with sort of this mindfulness approach, it's absolutely going to be in the land of awareness. So really starting to get you to understand what's going on for you when you have that extra piece, what's available to you, how you feel after, and just non-judgmental observation of it. Just you're not critiquing it. You're just noticing for a week or two when it comes up, what's going on in your life. And it's almost like a scientist kind of understanding yourself better. Then you and I would meet, and I'd say, tell me what your observations were. When did it come up? Like, what was going on? And then I'm going to ask you a simple question. Great. In the space of that, what intention can you, where do you want to take your first baby step of intervention? It's not going to fix it necessarily, but it's a meaningful step that you feel is, number one, moving you in a healthier direction. And number two, and this is the part that people forget, realistic. In other words, you're not saying, okay, next week I'm not going to have a single exam. You're going to say like, okay, next week I'm going to work on my eating out first. Like I've noticed that I'm choosing the easy route and eating out 5 times a week. I'm not saying I'm going to give up eating out, but I'm going to commit to once a week. I think that's realistic. I have some escape release valve, but whatever. I'm like, okay, let's, what I mean? We'll start there. So it's very much this iterative process. But what I found is diving straight into that, just diving straight into whatever the patient has come as the goal and just going straight down that rabbit hole. I'm wary of that before we've kind of looked at the big picture and said,
amazing.
Are we sure?
It's so clear. I'm quite aware of how this process works, and the way you're describing it is exactly, it's so accurate, because it's like the skill building side, or like self-worth, self-care, ability to manage cravings, ability to choose good food, have education about food. That's one, and that improves your response to triggers. But if you don't work on the triggers, they remain. And what I took from that is I've done a lot of work on both, but I've still got these mild triggers lingering around, but I've also got great skill in managing it. So what's happening is it's showing up as minor transgressions where before it was much larger ones.
Bigger.
And,
yes.
But the reason why I take it seriously, and this is for all the diabetics out there, when you're diabetic, it's not vanity. They have a real impact on your longevity. So yeah. I said to someone once, I said, how's it going to go? So it's a bit difficult. I'm struggling with a bit of tempeh, some vegan chocolate covered bananas and a bit of oil in the dressing. And they just laughed. And I forgot, oh, they don't know that this can be really damaged. This can be enough for a diabetic to have a HbA1c of like 6.2 rather than 5.6. Just that little bit of transgression. So yeah,
it's a great story. And let me take it even a level further. I'll never forget, this was, back probably 2017 when I was still very active at True North. And I'll never forget, I was in a lecture, and that was really 2007, a few years into McDougall was really when I started getting really interested in emotional eating, because I was just seeing it come up again and again and again. And the real crazy moment was when I realized, like, oh my gosh, I struggle with emotional eating. Like, here I am, I'm the medical director of the McDougall program, a worldwide program helping hundreds of thousands of individuals transform their health. And I struggle with emotional eating. And here's how it would show up, Joe. This very computer that I'm sitting in front of you, this has been the source, of multiple instances of emotional eating, because what will happen is here I am working on my PowerPoint or a lecture that I'm giving for some conference.
Right.
And I get stuck and I get paralyzed, and 1 hour passes and I maybe have not finished a single slide. And so the discomfort of that lack of productivity and the associated feelings of anxiety and, low self-worth that accompany it it's like too much. And so I'm not exaggerating. Back in those days, I could literally make over 20 trips to the kitchen and back. And what I would choose to eat was kind of what you're describing, the lighter version. Like, I would go there and have a handful of grapes, and then I'd go there and eat an apple, and then I might go there and like make a bowl of oatmeal. And so I was not binge eating unhealthy foods. And so in this lecture that I was giving on emotional eating, I was relaying this story, and I was relaying sort of my breakthrough with it as well, which was first just the awareness of it, and then what I said as my intention, which is I'm taking this on as a priority. I no longer want this to be such a dominant part of my life where emotional eating, even though it's healthy, has me. And I'll never forget the question. Participant raised his hands like, come on, Dr. Lim, look at you. Like, you're healthy, you're fit, you're eating healthy plant-based foods, even when you go over, it's like, is this really an issue? Like, is this really a problem? And I told him, yes, for me, it was, because I was not showing up as my best self in those moments. That even though it was not unhealthy foods, that was not how I wanted to be in the midst of difficulty, was turning to food as my source of comfort. I want my relationship with food to be one that's filled with joy and filled with gratitude and filled with appreciation for the tastes and the textures. And in those moments, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm stressed. This gives me something to do physically with my hands and my mouth, right? And that's not how I want to be. So yes, it was important to me, and it was highly symbolic and significant. And to this day, it is one of my favorite stories to say, is that, I mean, I may still have occasional, like every now and then, like kind of the theme we talked about earlier. Once it's a part of you, sometimes it's always kind of there, right? Even if you're not acting on it, that temptation. But it no longer owns me or has me to the same extent. And, for me, my response to now when I experience it is, I'm Christian and my faith is very important in my life. So I will pray or I will go for a walk. I will journal. I will talk to my wife of 21 years this December. I will, sing or whatever. I will do something that I can look back on later, and I'm like, yeah, I may have faced some adversity, but I'm proud and feel at peace with the way that I navigated that situation. And what I would say is that change has implications for other aspects of our life, right? Bottom line.
Amazing. You're kind of, we're getting close to the end now, and you're ending sort of answering in the most deepest way possible my first question about what makes success. And it's like, do you really want to be the best version of yourself?
Yeah.
Because that's the only, what I found in my path is all other motivations expire. The weakest motivation is weight loss, because once I achieve my weight goal, I have no motivation left. I've hit my goal. The one motivation that never runs out is wanting to be the best version of yourself, because there is no end.
Right. You never arrive.
Yeah. So to me, it's like, if I was in your house at that time just visiting, and I saw you come into the fridge, get some grapes, come back a bit later, I'd be like, this guy's so healthy, bit of broccoli. But it's not that's not your path. Your path is, I'm going here because I feel discomfort, and I'm using a tool that I don't want to use to manage this discomfort, and I want to grow through this discomfort, so I'm going to choose a different way. And that's the way I think I want to approach the continuation of my journey. Is like, it's not about the results, it's about my relationship with experience.
Right. 100%. And that's why I say that, for me, the journey of health is to narrow that gap in terms of the degree to which our best envisioned highest self that we can conceive of, whatever that looks like for each person, right? Depending on your faith or your history or whatever, your best conceived vision of your highest self, the degree to which your current thoughts, behaviors, words, and actions deviate from this. And this appreciation that no one is ever going to be here, right? That would be like that crazy thing where I said, Joe, I'm done. There's nothing left. Everything I say, think, and do is just perfect and completely aligned, right? No, I've never met that individual. So then anywhere there's a gap, it's just like, how do I close that gap so that, I'm just living more and more into my best self, and then what we do with that gap, and this is the key, is rather than judgment, condemnation, not good enough, it's curiosity, compassion, grace, acceptance, love, hope. Really,
really great. Well, this has been an incredible interview. I could talk to you for hours, but I got to value your time. You've got a lot of things going on. So I'm gonna finish with I'm just gonna jump to the last question, which is there any form of legacy or impact that you'd like to leave in the field of lifestyle medicine and this whole approach, mindfulness, emotional eating, and everything that you do?
We talked about community and the number one ingredient. And I said unconditional love, right? I just think that I believe love is the most transformative force in the universe, right? Hate, who is it? Martin Luther King, right? He said, hate doesn't transform hate, but basically love does, right? Love is the only thing that can transform hate. And I really believe that. And I think in this world that we sometimes can see is, at least based on the news, is increasingly divided. I just think the importance of connection and community and unconditional love, not only for others, but for ourselves, is essential, absolutely essential. And so, there's a famous Maya Angelou, right? She talked about how people, they can easily forget what you say to them or even what you do, but they don't forget how you left them feeling, how you made them feel. Right. And I think there's so much to that. So the legacy, I hope, is that my patients feel better. They feel better after they're more hopeful, they're more optimistic, they're more accepting of themselves. I tell my patients that if I ever say anything that to them seems judgmental, to please let me know, because that's absolutely not my intent. I want to be an experience of unconditional love. I tell them I will never drop them as a patient. If you can do everything the exact opposite of what I say, and I will still continue to support and love upon you unconditionally, which stands in contrast to most of my patients' experience with their doctors, which is if I don't follow their recommendation, they get really upset and they basically say they don't want to doctor me anymore, right? So that's really the legacy. Is I want that to be patients' experience of healing, and to see however that may manifest through the McDougall program in whatever form it can take, is for people to have that experience.
Amazing. Well, I feel like that having had this interview with you. So you're definitely doing. I'm sure other people will. Who so it's been amazing. Thank you very much. So if people want to get in touch or work with you, where do they go?
Best way is to go to the McDougall program website.
Follow the instructions there.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can either we run 12-day online intensive programs, but if patients aren't sure that it will be a great fit, they can also arrange an individual one-on-one consultation with me and do what we just talked about, understand their full history and have a conversation and see whether it would make sense for them or not.
Brilliant. I really enjoyed this interview so much. That was incredible. Thank you for being who you are, man. It's really good.
Thank you, Joe. That was a lot of fun.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.